Good evening, everyone. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while, and it's good to be back in Gazeley. Like coming to Gazeley, and of course you know the reason why, don't you? We're birds of a feather. We are in the same boat, as it were. I am a disfellowship member, but as I always say, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. I'm a true blue. I'm 100% Seventh-day Adventist, and I will be till I die. And what else can we be? But I believe in practicing Seventh-day Adventism, don't you? Yeah, not saying I'm one and not practicing it. Doing my best by the grace of God to be a true Seventh-day Adventist. At any rate, I'm very happy to be here and I hope that the Lord will give us one real good, solid blessings through this weekend. So let's talk. Let's open the Word of God first of all. Now, by way of introduction, as you know, the topic concerns Babylon. And why do I want to discuss Babylon at such a time as this? Well, let me tell you why. Today, amongst us in our movement, we find that there's a tremendous leaning toward spiritual Babylon. We find many in our latest church hymnals, not only the official one from the General Conference, but even in other lands where they have published their own hymnal, Seventh-day Adventist hymnal, there are Roman Catholic hymns in the hymnal, full of Roman Catholic theology, which is very serious. We shouldn't be singing Roman Catholic theology, should we? We find that the new versions are being pushed as hard as ever, and the versions, generally speaking, are in harmony with the Roman Catholic Bible, and the Catholics are very happy about the new versions. And the Seventh-day Adventists are pushing the new versions, unfortunately, or many Seventh-day Adventist leaders. We are using Roman Catholic terminology. We speak of the ordinances as the sacraments, a Roman Catholic term. We call the Lord's Supper the Eucharist in some of our churches, a Roman Catholic term, the Eucharist. Sometimes when they celebrate the Lord's Supper, we find that they put the tables together in the form of a cross with candles and celebrate the Lord's Supper. You know, Dr. Hislop refers to this as a practice the pagans performed. Then we have pastors who are being encouraged by the General Conference to join the ministers' fraternals in the cities where they are. This has been going on now for a number of years. And not only have they joined the fraternals, but they're taking leading roles in these fraternals with the other ministers, supporting them and leading out to many of their projects. I remember one pastor told his church not far from where my home is, that the church would not expect him to do too much for them because he was so busy working for the fraternal. And the conference wondered why the membership was so upset with their minister, because they believed they paid their tithe to be ministered to by the pastor. And then, of course, we have the General Conference. It has its membership in some sections of the World Council of Churches and of the National Council of Churches, and they pay quite a few $1,000s a year membership fees to be members. And the past president of the General Conference, remember, made this public statement that he could see nothing wrong with the ecumenical movement. That's a strange statement, isn't it? A strange statement. The ecumenical movement is a movement to bring about church union with Rome. One of our churches in North New South Wales in Australia They put a notice in the church bulletin urging the ladies during the week to attend the ecumenical service at the Roman Catholic Church. Do you think there's anything wrong with that? Not the ecumenical service. It was the service for I've just forgotten what they call it, but the purpose of it is for church union, to pray for church union. It was in the Roman Catholic Church, and here the pastor was urging the ladies to attend the Roman Catholic Church to enter into prayer for church union. Church union with whom? With Rome. That's what it is. And so, brethren, I'm beginning to go back to some of the fundamental doctrines of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in connection with Babylon. And we need to look again at who is Babylon, what's the origin of Babylon, why are we against Babylon? We have a very good reason. I remember a senior pastor in Greater Sydney conference 2 or 3 years back, after attending a seminar at Avondale College. He went back, and in the report that he gave with other ministers as to what had happened, this is what he said. What he said, brethren, no longer can I preach on Revelation 13 and 14. And why? He says, because the beast has changed. The beast has changed. Now, of course, many of our men do believe the beast has changed, and the beast claims it has changed.
He had his teeth extracted.
Yeah, it claims it has changed. You know, the charismatics, they are convinced that the Catholic Church has repented of what it has done in the past, because the Catholic charismatics have confessed these things, and they believe that it's changed. Do you think it's changed? Spirit of prophecy tells us, and quotes Rome's motto, Rome never changes. She makes out she has changed, but she hasn't and will never change. All right, so then we need to look at this, at Babylon. Who is Babylon? What's the origin of Babylon? We go now to Revelation 14 verse 8, the second angel's message. And here Babylon is introduced in the last days. And the second angel's message, the message that is neglected as well as the first angel's message and the third angel's message that's neglected today in the preaching amongst us, this is what it says in verse 8. And there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Now these are symbolic terms. In prophecy, a city denotes what? A religious organisation, an ecclesiastical system. So here is a system called Babylon. It's fallen, morally fallen, spiritually fallen, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. What's wine in Scripture? Wine denotes doctrine, teaching. And here is teaching that all nations have absorbed, and it makes them wrath, or will make them wrath. It's of course spoken of as fornication, which denotes illicit union in a spiritual sense. So who is this Babylon? And where does this language come from? It comes from the Old Testament. Here the Apostle John is quoting from the Old Testament. Remember, the book of Revelation is based on the Old Testament. And it's just full of phrases from the Old Testament. So we go back to the Old Testament then to find out a little about Babylon and why it is that God is so much against Babylon. And now we turn to Genesis, the 10th chapter. And we're going to talk about, first of all, the origin of Babylon, where the word began. And the beginning of something is very important in Scripture. The first mention of it is very significant, as well as the last mention of it, the first and the last. In chapter 10 of Revelation of Genesis, notice what it says here from verse 6 onwards. And it says, the sons of Ham. Remember, Noah had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And from them, of course, came all the races of the earth. And the sons of Ham, Cush and Mizraim and Phut and Canaan. And the sons of Cush, Sheba and Havilah and Sabta and Ramah and Sabtichar, and the sons of others mentions there. And then verse 8, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. Here's the first man that's spoken of as being a mighty one. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. The Septuagint says against the Lord. Wherefore it is said, and he was so famous or infamous was this man. Here's the saying that's come down through the ages, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before or against the Lord. So this Nimrod made a great name for himself. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh and in the land of Shinar. Now some of these cities have been unearthed, as you know. Some have not yet been discovered. Over in the land of Shinar, which is now Iraq, there are many, many mounds, that have not yet been unearthed. And no doubt some of these cities will be found there if they continue to excavate. And so here it mentions this man, Nimrod. He was a Hamite, meaning he was a Negro. And tradition tells us that Nimrod was a Negro, a black man. Not that that is anything against him, but he was a giant amongst men in physical stature. I remember reading an account once of J.P. Morgan, the American millionaire. He was going across by ocean liner to Europe here, and he was spending a lot of money, and he was going to buy an ancient painting of Nimrod. And I mentioned how this ancient painting pictured Nimrod as a giant Negro. It's fascinating. And undoubtedly he was. He was a Hamite, you see. And so here is the foundation or the beginning of Babylon. And Nimrod, authorities differ in the meaning of Nimrod. Some say he shall rebel is the meaning of the name. It means rebel. Others say it denotes the subduer of the leopard. And Nimrod was noted as the one who was able to train certain wild animals to use for hunting. And so he became a great hunter. And not only a hunter, but a protector of the people. He was the first to train the horse, the dog, and the leopard for hunting. Here he began, it says, to be a mighty one in the earth. He was the first king, the first despot, the first one to dominate peoples of the world. Moffat says, the first man on earth to be a despot. He was also called Merodach. Remember that name is mentioned in the Old Testament, Merodach. That was one of the names of Nimrod. And that name also, according to some authorities, represents or means the rebel, meaning a rebel against God. He was a mighty hunter against the Lord. Against him, not for him, against him. And now in verse 11, notice what it says of chapter 10. Out of that land went forth Asher and builded Nineveh. And the margin puts it this way. Out of that land went forth Nimrod and built Nineveh. And the city Rehoboth and Calah. Calah has been excavated. And of course so has Nineveh. And you probably have heard the story that when Austin Layard excavated Nineveh, he had a lot of the locals doing the work, and they finally came across a great statue of a head, a tremendous head way down in the earth. And when the natives saw it, they fled in terror. And Austin Layard couldn't understand it, and finally he discovered that they recognised this head as the head of their god. Interesting, isn't it? And it turned out to be the head, or rather a copy of the head of Nimrod. Nimrod. And so that indicated that he was the founder of that city, you see. They discovered this great statue, this great head of Nimrod in the excavation of Nineveh. Now the word Nineveh means the habitation of Ninus, another name for Nimrod. And Justin's history tells us that Nimrod's kingdom extended over all the east. So it must have been an extensive empire that he founded. He was the first king, the first despot, and he certainly extended his influence much further than we probably realise. And so that was the first empire. I believe that when we discuss the Revelation 17 and the 7 heads, that uphold, or the 7 mountains that uphold the woman, that one of those heads is Nimrod, is Babylon, or Babylonia under Nimrod, for that was where the sun worship was founded in the earth. And it should start there with Nimrod's kingdom. All right, so much then for that. So that was his empire. And then notice it speaks of how he went forth out of that land. He builded Nineveh and other places there. And then when we come to Genesis 11, here it brings us to Babylon again. And notice what it says. It says the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. What that language was, we can only guess at. But it says it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, or actually in the Hebrew it means eastward. Probably it was southeast, but at any rate it was an easterly direction. As they journeyed eastward, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. And of course that's the ancient name for Iraq, the land between the rivers, Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and the Euphrates, and in particular the southern area of the Euphrates Valley. And they came to this land which was well watered, and there they dwelt. And it says, they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. Now in that valley, in that area, there's no stone as such. And so they had to produce some kind of building material. And so they took the clay and burnt it. And today, as you know, when you go over there and see the ancient buildings that they have unearthed, you find that's what they're made of, the burnt clay, baked clay. When you go down to Ur of the Chaldees, there you can see the ziggurat tower. And you can go up the steps right up to a certain part of this tower, and it's made of bricks made of clay, not stone. And notice what else it says in verse 11. It says, and slime had they for mortar. Slime, that's a strange word, isn't it? How could slime keep bricks together? And when you go there, you realise what the slime was. The slime was bitumen. Bitumen. And that text is what led the oil men of the United States to go over in search of oil in Iraq. Because they reckon if there's bitumen there, oil. Oil. And as you know, Iraq is one of the great oil producing centres of the world. And what oil, what quantities they've discovered there. When you go up these steps of the ziggurat, here's the black bitumen holding the bricks together. And it's as good, if not better, than cement. Even today, after how many years? 4,000 years. It's still as solid as ever. So slime had they for mortar, or bitumen had they for mortar. And so here is the beginning of Babel. For let's go on. It says, and they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach to heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower. It's an interesting expression, isn't it? The Lord came down. I wouldn't say he came down like he did at Sinai, but maybe he came down disguised as a human being, as has happened since that. He came down to see the city and the tower. This doesn't indicate that God couldn't see it from heaven above, but maybe he came down and mixed amongst the people. Just like he came down to Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember, the Son of God came down? Yeah, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And who did he visit? Abraham, yeah. So the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they all have one language, and this they begin to do. What were they doing? Let's have a look at it. What were they doing? Well, first of all, we'll go read a bit further. And it says, this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Or really, it means left off from building the tower to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Now there, in 9 short verses, we have the origin of Babylon. Its origin. Nimrod was its founder. And the size of this tower that they built, it says it reached to heaven, undoubtedly to the atmospheric heaven, up into the clouds. You know, when I first read that, I thought, how could they possibly do that? But you know, when I went up the Empire State Building in New York and looked down and saw the clouds, I realised, well, modern man builds up into the clouds, into the heaven, you know. And do you think ancient man could have done that? Undoubtedly. We have evidence now of the skill and the ability of ancient men and what they were able to do. And no doubt it was a simple thing for them to build a tower to that height. And undoubtedly they did. And then it says, it gives us here the motive. Let us make us a name. The motive in the establishment of Babylon was pride, was self-exaltation. And always that is what motivates Babylon. This is one reason God hates it. It's contrary to God. What is the motive of the Christian, of the God-inspired man? Let this mind be in you, which also was in Christ Jesus. And what was that? Who, being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation. Just the opposite to the spirit of Babylon. And so that was what was behind Babylon, pride and self-exaltation. And again it says, lest we be scattered abroad. What did that mean? This was defiance, this was rebellion. For in Genesis 9 verse 1, remember the command of God was after the flood that they were to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. The earth. God never intended the human race to gather together in cities. He intended to live a nomadic life and spread abroad over the earth and not congregate in cities. That's understandable, isn't it, today? When we see what happens in the cities. And so that was the command, but this was in defiance of that. It was an act of rebellion, you see. And no doubt another reason was to protect, for protection in case there came another flood. In other words, they disbelieved the promise of God that there would never be another flood. Isn't that right? Did God promise there'd never be a flood? Look at Genesis 9:11. And here is the promise. Never again will there be a flood of water. Next time it will be a flood of fire, but never again of water. And I will establish my covenant with you. Here's God speaking to Noah. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood. neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. That must have been very comforting to the people of that day, to Noah and his family. Because remember, before the flood, was there any rain? No. But after the flood, or from the flood on, there was to be rain. And no doubt, whenever rain would come, whenever the dark cloud would come, the people would be in fear that there might be another worldwide flood. You see, and so God made this covenant with the human race, that never again would he destroy the earth with a flood. But they disbelieved that, and so they built the tower way up into the clouds, higher than the mountains, in an endeavour to escape from any flood that might come. Now, not only that, it says a tower whose top would reach unto heaven. Why heaven? There was intense interest in the heavenly bodies by these peoples. And we now know that they studied the sun, the moon and the planets, and they were led to venerate them. They venerated these heavenly bodies. And so we find that as a result of that, Babylon became the home of astrology. They worshipped, when they built the tower, they built 7 stages, 7 stories. And each story was dedicated to one of the planets. Not the planets as we understand them, but the planets were the sun, the moon, let me list them for you, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn. They were the 7, what they termed the 7 planets. And so the 7 stages of the Tower of Babel were dedicated to those particular objects in the heavens. And then on the top story, they communed there with their God. And it seems somehow that the God appeared in a certain form. And certain rites took place, which I don't like to mention in mixed company here. But according to ancient historians, they speak about this, that their God appeared. And of course we know what God it was. For who was the inspirer of Babylon? Satan, that's right. How do we know that? I'll read now Isaiah 14, and I want you to notice what it says. In speaking of Babylon, verse 4, it says this: Thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, How hath the oppressor ceased, the golden city ceased? And who's it talking about? Well, we might say Nebuchadnezzar, but verse 12 indicates who was the invisible king of Babylon. There was another person there, another power, who was inspiring the Babylonians. And notice who it's talking about. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I'll ascend into heaven, I'll exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. So there we have a description of Lucifer, the invisible king of Babylon. The invisible king. So, I want now just to fill in these details concerning Babylon. All right, now we've got the origin of Babylon. And the answer to the origin is China. The land of China. S-H-I-N-A-R. China, and we'll put south, the southern area of the Euphrates Valley. The time after the flood. Actually, it was in the time of Abraham. After the flood. And how long ago was the flood? We could say approximately 2,000 BC, after that time. All right? Remember the date of the Exodus was about 1500 BC. 500 years before that, approximately, was the flood. And in that period, that 500 years, was when Babylon rose. The founder, Nimrod. Whose name means the rebel. And we'll put here, he was a Negro giant. And of course there were giant peoples in that day, many giant peoples, giant races. And it had come down to even to the time of Moses, there were still some giant races in the earth. The inspirer was Lucifer, who was Babylon's invisible king, and always has been, and always will be, and is at the present time. Am I right? That's right. It's important to remember, he is Babylon's invisible king. The developer of Babylon, I should have put here, perhaps the philosophy of Babylon. I've missed it out, but the philosophy of it was sun worship, the worship of the heavenly bodies, astrology. And it's recognised and has been for hundreds of years. The home of theology, of astrology, is Babylon. And when you take the newspapers and see the astrological chart, brethren, that comes from Babylon. Babylon is still with us. And it's quite astonishing how much of Babylonian law is with us today. I've just recently got the Oriental Watchman publishing firm to publish a book for me. It's the content of it I got from one of our scholars way back in 1956, a man called Merle Vance. Anyone heard of Merle Vance? He's now dead. But he did the theological course in America but did not enter the ministry. He went into business, and he became involved in the study of 666 and the pagan mysteries. And as a result, he was led to do 20 years of research concerning it. And he produced 25,000 pages of microfilmed evidence. And in '56, when I visited him in Los Angeles, he gave me a copy of his material. And I took it back home, thinking, well, one day I'll, I used, of course, a lot of material from it, but Merle Vance never published his material. What happened was that he discovered the secrets of the secret societies of the world, including Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism and all that, and found that it had all come from Babylon, including Roman Catholicism. It's quite a startling disclosure, and the penalty for it is death if you reveal those secrets. And the report is that Merle Vance died a mysterious death, and his family will not release his materials. Some of our brethren have wanted to get the materials to publish the material, you see. Led me into this. Oh yes, about the philosophy of Babylon. See, it is nothing more or less than astrology, the worship of the heavenly bodies, and how they control men. And the interesting thing about this, brethren, that they looked upon these gods as evil gods. And the Babylonian religion is nothing more or less than a form of appeasement of these gods. They don't know of a God of love as we know it. They don't understand that. But they're afraid of these gods, and that's what Catholicism is. It's a religion of fear and of appeasement, you see. All right, so the next one is the developer of sun worship, the developer of astrology. And that brings us to Ishtar, or Semiramis, the queen of Nimrod. And she was a very beautiful, a very attractive woman, but a very immoral woman was Semiramis, the queen of Babylon. If you have been over to Iraq and you go to the ruins of Babylon, you know they've re-erected, reconstructed a part of Babylon for the sake of the tourists, to attract the tourists. And they've re-erected the gate, the Ishtar Gate. And in a niche in the Ishtar Gate there was the naked statue of Ishtar. And they've put it back there. They've restored it. And she became an object of worship. Now, of course, Nimrod was finally slain in battle. The ones who opposed him were Shem, the leader of the people of God, and Nimrod, according to tradition, was slain by Shem. And that drove sun worship underground. And that brought to the fore the developer, Semiramis or Ishtar, and she in secret developed sun worship into a very clever, and inspired by Satan, of course, into a very clever form of religion. So we put down here, for the developer of it, Semiramis, and that is a very popular name, still in the East, is Semiramis, or Ishtar, and Ishtar is called by various names in various languages. Ishtar, the queen of Nimrod, for lack of space. Now the form, I've already mentioned the form of Babylonian. It was, no, we haven't mentioned, but here it is. It's the mysteries. She developed the mysteries, which are a part of all paganism and a part of the mystery cults or mystery lodges, such as the Masonic, the Rosicrucians, etc. They have their mysteries. And anyone who reveals those mysteries, death's the penalty. And Merle Vance brings to view the secrets of Freemasonry and shows it's nothing more or less than sun worship. Mormonism is very similar. Sun worship, you see. So that was the form that it took. The mysteries, which amounted to the worship of the dead Nimrod. I wish I had more room here. Who was supposed to be alive, you see, his spirit. And so this led to the development of the idea of the underworld, where the spirits of the dead resided, you see, but they were alive, the underworld, and which we today would call the occult, or the occult. And so that's where the occult started. That was the form of it, Babylon, the occult. And like anything else which counterfeits, this became, of course, a great counterfeit. It was especially instigated by Lucifer as a counterfeit of the great religion that was to come, that was to be set up by the true Messiah, Christianity. And so naturally they had their false Messiah. And who was their false Messiah? Ishtar gave birth to a son. She claimed that she was a virgin, but her child had been fathered by the spirit of Nimrod who had come from the sun. So he was the son of the sun, you see, the sun god. And so that there we have the invention of the mother of God. That's where it started. And so his name was Tammuz. 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 And the cross, his word starts with T, the cross stood for Tammuz, generally stood for Tammuz, the sun god, or the son of the sun god. And he was the false Messiah. He was Ishtar's son. The false Messiah. And he was called by various names that the Old Testament spoke of or described Jesus. He was called the branch. He was called the Saviour. He was called the Lord of the Covenant, just like Jesus was. He was called by other names as well, which I will come to soon. And then I want you to notice now what happened and how the Lucifer was so deeply involved in this. As I said before, he was the invisible ruler of Babylon, and associated with this religion was the serpent in particular, the serpent. Now Merle Vance talks about the serpent and shows how the serpent worship has come right down through the years, and wherever you find false religion, you find the serpent. You find it in the secret lodges, the worship of the serpent. It's in Roman Catholicism. And did you know that that astrology is, the Roman Catholic Church is deeply embedded in astrology? If you go to the Vatican, you can see it. It stares you in the face in St. Peter's. Astrology. The popes in the Middle Ages were astrologers. Yeah, there's a Catholic book was produced at that time called Die Fortuna. It's nothing more or less than a book on astrology, you know. So they are deeply imbibed or embedded in astrology. And as Dr. Hislop says, he says, the serpent is universally the symbol of the sun. The symbol of the sun is the serpent. We cannot go into more detail about that now. And of course in Scripture, whom does the serpent represent? That old serpent called the devil and Satan. So wherever we see the serpent, when you go to India, you see the serpent. You see the serpent all around the world. It represents Satan every time. And I want you to notice how the psalmist gives us the clue that behind the worship of the serpent, behind the worship of the idols, behind all paganism, is nothing more or less than evil spirits. Listen to this. Speaking of Israel, they mingled among the heathen, they served their idols, they sacrificed their sons and daughters to devils. They sacrificed unto the idols of Canaan. Now the Canaanites were recognised sun worshippers. And when they offered their children to these idols, they were offering them to devils. And you know, it seems that behind this idol worship there were miraculous things that took place. Voices and things like that, spirit voices that convinced the people that there was a power behind the idol. They tell me, you know, that according to ancient Egypt, the ancient Egyptian religion, that voices used to sound from the Sphinx as the people worshipped. And, you know, that would convince them that it was a god. And maybe that's how those people back in those days, who were intelligent people, were led to worship inanimate objects because of the miraculous things that evil spirits performed in connection with them. And maybe we'll see that be repeated as far as the world is concerned in the future. So sun worship developed through Semiramis. Nimrod was finally destroyed by Seth. It was forced underground, and Semiramis, Babylon's queen, became the developer of Babylon. And she was the one that invented the mysteries, according to Dr. Hislop. And Semiramis was called Ishtar. In Assyria she was called Astarte. In Syria she was called Ashtoreth. Remember Baal and Ashtoreth in the days of Elijah? That was none other than Ishtar. In Egypt she was called Isis. And there in Egypt she's pictured nursing the child, remember? Nursing the child. Isis. In Rome she was called Juno. In Asia Minor she was called Diana. Whereabouts? What place? The Ephesians. Yep, Diana of the Ephesians. That was none other than Ishtar. In Greece she was called Venus. And remember, Venus is spoken of as the goddess of love. But what kind of love? Illicit love. Illicit love. In other words, of immorality. That's what she was the goddess of. She was also called Cybele, and later, as we all know, her name was called Mary. Yeah, clever, isn't it? Diabolically clever. And so around the world, millions and millions of people who believe they're Christians worship Mary. And they're worshipping none other than the Queen of Babylon. Yeah, Ishtar. And so these mysteries were invented by Semiramis. They continued their sun worship in secret until it was safe to come out into the open. And in these mysteries, the initiates were led into the worship of the dead Nimrod, believing he was still alive. And it was nothing else more than the worship of Satan, the worship of Lucifer, aided or under the deception of evil spirits. Now, it's interesting to notice that they were led in their worship of the sun to look upon the sun as the source of all life, which of course it is in the physical world, isn't it? Without the sun, there's no fertility, there's no reproduction. And so they were led to worship the principle of fertility. And the most acceptable form of worship was to employ their powers in procreation. That was the most acceptable form of worship. And so prostitution became the main form of sun worship, the main feature of sun worship, prostitution. And not only did they have their female prostitutes, but they had their male prostitutes. And the centres of sun worship became notorious as centres of immorality. And you can understand how this swept through mankind, can't you? Because it would have a tremendous appeal to the natural heart, you see. And a man, before he could worship the sun or engage in the worship in the temple, he must consort with a female before he could worship. And the sacrifice of virginity was the most acceptable of all offerings to the sun. In fact, it must be the first offering. Now, that information I got from A.T. Jones' book, one of his books called The Two Babylons that he wrote, or rather the Two Republics. And this is rather, startling information, but it indicates how it was that sun worship spread around the world through all mankind. Wherever you go in the world, you find sun worship in some form or other. You find it there. It had a terrific appeal to the carnal, unconverted heart, and thus the majority of the race were led astray. And this no doubt explains God's fearful warnings against the worship of the sun or anything connected with it. For reading in the 18th chapter of Leviticus, notice what it says here. It lists all the restrictions in regard to sexuality. It seems that before this time that there were very few restrictions. It was quite common for brother to marry sister and for others related to marry. Remember, the pharaohs for centuries married their sisters, even their daughters, to keep the throne in the family. But finally, in the days of Moses, God laid down very strict instructions in regard to marriage and in regard to sexuality. And in the 18th chapter of Deuteronomy, after giving all these restrictions, it says here in verse 25 or 24, "Defile not you yourselves in any of these things, For in all these the nations are defiled, which I cast out before you, that is from Canaan. And the land is defiled, therefore I do visit the iniquity thereof upon it, and the land itself vomiteth out her inhabitants. What a description of the corruption of the people of that day, of these pagan sun worshippers. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not commit any of these abominations, neither any of your own nation, nor any stranger that sojourns among you. For all these abominations have the men of the land done, which were before you, and the land is defiled. It's interesting, isn't it? Immorality, brethren, defiles the land in the eyes of God. It defiles the land as well as the people. That the land spew not you out also when you defile it, as it spewed out the nations that were before you. For whosoever shall commit any of these abominations, even the souls that commit them shall be cut off from among their people. Therefore shall you keep mine ordinances, that you commit not any one of these abominable customs which were committed before you, and that you defile not yourselves therein. I am the Lord your God. And in the next chapter, notice what it says in verse 26. It says, you shall not eat anything with the blood, which of course the pagans did in connection with sun worship. Neither shall you use enchantments, nor observe times. You shall not round the corners of your heads, neither shalt thou mar the corners of thy beard. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead. That reminds us of Elijah on Mount Carmel when they cut themselves, remember? Nor print any marks upon you, referring to tattooing, all a part of sun worship.
What's the one about the head?
About the head?
Yeah, what's it about the shaking the head?
I'm not sure about that one, unless it's the tonsure. You remember the Roman Catholic priests, certain orders have the tonsure, the head is shaven, and in the middle of the head there's one tuft of hair. That is a phallic symbol representing the sun and something else, which I'll come to maybe later. But a lot of these things were phallic. It was the worship of the principle of fertility. To put it bluntly, it was sex worship. Yeah. Then notice at the end.
Excuse me, what's
yes.
the reference?
Leviticus 19. We're now on verse 28. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor print any marks upon you. So true Christians shouldn't have anything to do with tattooing. It's pagan. It belongs to the devil. Do not prostitute thy daughter. What did I say? Did I make a mistake in something I said? Do not prostitute thy daughter to cause her to be a whore. Was that common amongst the sun worshippers? I tell you, brethren, it was staggering, the immorality of Babylon. I don't know whether I should mention some of the practices they had. Do you know that when a girl came of age in Babylon, that the parents took her down to the centre of the city in a certain place, and there she was as she was free, available to any man who came. And they tell us the men would line up often. If it was an attractive girl, they would line up, hundreds of them. And if the girl was unattractive, she'd be there for weeks, even months. Isn't it sordid? I tell you, brethren, terrible. And so he says, do not prostitute thy daughter to cause her to be a whore, lest the land fall to whoredom, and the land become full of wickedness. You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. It's interesting, isn't it? true Sabbath keeping, reverence, right in the heart of that belong to God. Regard not them that have familiar spirits or spirit mediums, neither seek after wizards to be defiled by them. I'm the Lord your God. So there is that warning given by heaven. Very strong terms, and as we all know, the prophets were fierce in their denunciations of this false worship, and we can understand why. All right, now, by the way, in Deuteronomy 22, verse 5, Moses also refers to a custom that the sun worshippers practice. He says here, the woman shall not wear that which pertains to a man. Neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are abomination to the Lord thy God. And the sun worshippers, before they practiced their initial rites that were essential before they entered the temple, they changed garments. This was a part of their immoral acts. They changed their garments. And so this is what Moses is referring to here, you see. You shall not do that. And
the text?
pardon?
What was the text?
Deuteronomy 22 verse 5. And Job also, or rather perhaps I should say Moses in the book of Job, refers also to a pagan practice of the sun worshippers. He says, if I beheld the sun when it shined, or the moon walking in brightness, and my heart hath been secretly enticed, or my mouth hath kissed my hand, and the practice was to throw a kiss to the moon, this also were an iniquity to be punished by the judge, for I should have denied the God that is above. It's interesting, isn't it? Even that. Yeah, even that.
That one, please. What was the text?
That was Job 31, 26 to 28. So those were the warnings given by heaven. Now this brings us, of course, to the next point here. There was the false Messiah, Tammuz, the son of Ishtar, the false Messiah. And his birth date was, as we all know, December 25. And that day was celebrated by the pagans hundreds of years before Christ. They had held great orgies in connection with it. Rank immorality was practiced on that day in connection with it. The sun worship, you see the worship of the practice of the principle of fertility. And the sad thing today, I've heard Sabbath school teachers, especially teaching the children, telling them now that December 25 was Jesus' birthday. Brethren, should we be saying that? Should we? Is it the truth? It's not the truth, brethren. And no matter how beautiful we may, clothe it, it's a lie. It's an insult. It's an insult. It was the birthday of the enemy of the Lord Jesus Christ. The birthday of his enemy. There's a couple of spare seats there, folk, if you'd like to come and occupy them and be comfortable. So there we have the origin of Christmas, the birthday of the illegitimate child of Ishtar or Semiramis, who claimed that he had been fathered by the spirit of Nimrod who had come from the sun, that he was a reincarnation of Nimrod. And reincarnation, brethren, that teaching belongs to Babylon, and it's all through paganism, isn't it? It's all through it, and it comes from Babylon, reincarnation. And so she was called from that time on the Mother of God. So he was born on December 25, that day associated with feasting, drunkenness, immorality. The early Britons, I understand, the Celts, they celebrated December 25 by calling it, what was the term they called it? Yule Day, Y-U-L-E. Do you know where the word Yule comes from? Dr. Hislop says that comes from Babylon. It's a Babylonian word. And what does Yule mean? It means infant. Infant's Day. You see? What infant? The illegitimate child of Semiramis. So much then for that. And this Tammuz became the counterfeit Messiah. He was called the seed of the woman. And of course Satan knew the prophecies, didn't he? That's right. He knew the true Messiah would be the seed of the woman. And so Tammuz was called the seed of the woman. He was also called Lord. He was called Mediator. He was called Saviour. He was called the Branch. He was called the Lord of the Covenant. The same terms that Jesus was called, especially in the Old Testament. And of course, in venerating him, in worshipping him, they used the cross. And here we have the origin of the cross. The T, the cross, stands for Tammuz, the false Messiah, the reincarnation of Nimrod. That's the origin of the cross. And it was worn by the priests. It was counted or used as a charm. And it's still used by many as a charm in the pagan world. The Vestal Virgins of Rome wore the cross around their necks, just like the nuns do today. And you know, some of the orders, or yes, at least one of the orders of the nuns of the Catholic Church comes from the Vestal Virgins of Rome. Nearly every pagan tribe uses the cross. In fact, there's a whole chapter in this book by Merle Vance on the cross that gives you some very interesting information, and it's all documented information concerning the cross. And of course, the cross with the ring in it represents the sun and Tammuz. And the pagans, in order to appease the sun god, would offer sacrifices to the sun. And when they offered them, they would nail the sacrifice to a cross. And there we have the origin of crucifixion.